if people work together, that actually we can make anything possible. Okay, welcome everybody. My name is Theodore Spiropoulos, and we're going to kick off basically the DRL's virtual open day. So it's an opportunity, if you guys are listening in, basically to ask questions. So if there are some questions, you guys could obviously share that with us, and we will do our best in terms of communicating a little bit what this is all about. I'm joined today actually by 4 very talented students that have come to us from pretty far away and sometimes not so far away. On my right is
Cesar Fragachan, currently a Phase 2 student in the DRL, coming from Venezuela.
Hi, I'm Laura Vartiotis, I'm Greek, and I'm Phase 2 as well.
Hi, I'm Shiri, I'm from Israel, and I'm Phase 1.
Hello, my name is Didem Shine, and I'm coming from Turkey, and I'm currently a Phase 2 student as well.
So we thought some of the things that we could kind of share is do a short presentation, a PowerPoint, just to kind of speak a little bit about what the program is actually exploring. Part of the kind of framework for the DRL is really about trying to find a way where we can work collaboratively, sort of explore, I think, pretty much almost any problem within the domain of architecture and urbanism. And in some way, I think our attitude towards space is something that sort of unifies architecture beyond the built environment as we know it. So I think part of the real importance of the contribution that everybody has that comes to the DRL is that everybody is really an active participant and in some way really sort of shaping the discourse of what we've been doing as the intro video showed, something that we've been working on for over 20 years. The PowerPoint is really an opportunity just to kind of talk about some subject matters. So we're just switching on to now the PowerPoint. And I think a lot of the things that we're working on at the moment is really around this whole concept of the future. But the idea of the future is not something of like 60s or 70s nostalgia. It's really trying to problematize the idea of living, the idea of work, and the idea of culture, and what that really means within the contemporary landscape. So we kick it off with a quote from Marshall McLuhan, which says, "The future of the future is the present." And I think one of the things about our approach to things is really trying to find agency in terms of how we actually work on these problems. We have a very international community of students that come to us from pretty much everywhere. And one of the things that becomes very empowering is how that kind of cultural consolidation within the lab environment sort of uses architecture as a common language. That's something that's very shared. The way that we work with computational tools, the way that we think about design research is all part, I think, of an active methodology, but also practice. This is a famous kind of movie by Godard that basically said that no one has lived in the past and no one will live in the future. I think realistically what we're trying to do is to speculate about what is really the problems of the contemporary world today. There is a strong kind of lineage in history, I think, of experimental kind of architectural projects. Maybe one of them that resonates a lot with this particular community is really the architecture machine group that was led by Nicholas Negroponte at MIT. 10 years later, that experiment became something called the Media Lab and was part of this kind of communication revolution, and I think part of that was sort of being problematized by just looking about what computers and their role was in everyday life. If we look at the things today, I think we live in a quite radical moment, and I think one of the things that we try to explore is actually what makes today different. Today, I think, is really a world where there is so much kind of interaction between a lot of the technological strategies that are basically being enacted on the general public, but at the same time, the same people that are creating it have paradoxically difficulties about looking at things like artificial intelligence and technology. The role of what we're doing, basically, is really to look at technology from a very human perspective, and to look at how things are basically an extension of us. It's not something that sits outside of us. So a lot of the tools, a lot of the things that we look at, like this Google app, that basically tries to use machine learning to sort of tell you that you want to draw a bunny rabbit and stuff like that, is not what we're looking at. But what is part of this kind of world is sort of demystifying it and sort of making it part of the kind of architectural research and problems that we're looking at today. How do things see other things? How does architecture, from material down in terms of how life cycles could actually operate to the scale of the city, actually really start to construct some very, I think, alternative way of thinking about things today? When everything has the potential to have a certain kind of agency and a way of observing the world, what does that really mean for architecture today? When vehicles are part of our urbanism, when we have autonomous systems, it's all part of, I think, a very different kind of conversation. The conversation on this sometimes basically foregrounds this kind of work and in some way lends us to be developing maybe more robotic kind of strategies, like some of these kind of more self-assembled, autonomous kind of creature-like elements. But on the other hand, it's also a continuation and I think a resurgence of actually looking at how architecture as a building could start to really sort of operate, but on different terms. A lot of the methodologies that we use take very kind of hands-on approach of analog computing, things that were quite famously kind of put forward by people like Frei Otto and others, and using this kind of idea that making is a very important part of the way that we practice and think, finding opportunities that sort of develop things. And as we develop things, we also sort of expand the way that we work and approach on architecture. Our approach, I think, is very much prototypical. We base our attitude towards things through a kind of very active engagement that sort of lends us sometimes into trajectories that are not necessarily so common practiced within architecture. I think it's important to say that the DRL obviously is a program that is post-professional at MARC, and all of our students that come to the DRL are already established architects in their own right. So in some sense, it's not to sort of kind of create a new educational strand, but is sort of to expand and evolve what that actually really means for architecture in a much more kind of holistic way. And that really sort of taking on board, I think, all of the interests and some of the challenges that all of our students and our staff actually continuously are sort of working on. We also are a bit unapologetic, if I'm honest, about design. We believe that design is a really important contribution to contemporary culture, and we think that design is something that actually is fundamental to the way that we sort of communicate. So as we sort of explore a lot of new tools and so forth, it's not necessarily the novelty of things, it's about sort of actively participating, I think, in a lot of the stuff that's actually out there in the world. Sometimes strategies of thinking about what a kind of autonomous self-driving system could be, but looking at the problems of parking and sort of creating an idea of a shared model of infrastructure to augment the city, as in this project that we see here at the moment. This is all to say basically that almost everything that could be considered architecture and somehow finds its form in the studio. Ideas of making and stuff like that sometimes creates opportunities for very unexpected moments. Here, Agata is working with one of her prototypes, which is supposed to be a machine that basically takes decisions. What we discover by doing these things is also sort of enabling, I think, a very different conversation, how things themselves could be emotive, how we could work on behavioral or parametric approaches. And the studio is basically really structured in a way to support that with workshops and seminars, and actually studios that are looking at things from a top-down parametric approach to things that are much more generative. We use Hook Park and other facilities at the AA to make things fly, to construct prototypes, to create 3D printing strategies. We basically are looking at architecture in a much more kind of experimental and kind of radical way, and we sort of feel that we're part of a community that basically is demanding for architecture a lot more. And in that sense, this statement in somehow kind of summarizes that. So I think with that sort of coming to a conclusion, I think maybe we could open this up to maybe some of the questions, and then I think the students could share, I think, some of their, the reasons that actually they came as well to a program like the Design Research Lab. So thanks. Who would like to start? Maybe Didem, do you want to speak a little bit about your pathway here?
Yes, I can speak about it. I mean, I attended to the visiting workshop in Istanbul, and after graduated, I was working with former DRL student. I think I was always chasing DRL's projects from far away, and it's been an amazing year for me because I mean, I learned so many things in that year, and I couldn't imagine that I was able to do that stuff before I coming here. But now, I mean, it's really good to work as a team and learn from each other and to be a part of that community.
And Shiri, if you, because you're just joining us basically, so you're basically like 2 weeks into this, I think it would be kind of interesting because maybe it's common in terms of how people are coming to the place, but maybe one of the things that is important to us within the DRL is the overlap of students that have completed a one-year cycle overlapping with new students, and I don't know if you could speak a little bit what you found, and then basically maybe communicate a little bit.
Well, so yeah, I'm just in the initial stage, so it's pretty hard to share my experience so far, but the past 2 weeks were super overwhelming in a very good way, because like the whole concept of this program is so different than what I was used to, and I guess that most of us wasn't used to working in groups and share what we think and like evolve from the work together. And with that said, the overlap with phase 2 can help us a lot even just getting their data and just create new things from it, and also use their help to continue with our workshop. So yeah, it's great community, as Didem said.
Yeah, I think we don't have the experience. Let's say you just came, phase ones just came, so we only have the experience when we came and when we found phase twos. And I can say, like, after we're gonna leave, it's kind of weird. I mean, you feel more safe, let's say, having people around you that they know what they're doing. And I think
there's always someone we can ask questions and can guide us and can show us even where to get stuff. And
yeah, because I think, I mean, maybe one of the things that a prospectus or other things maybe doesn't really necessarily fully communicate to people is the sense that I think we try to foster a culture that is around community. And structurally speaking, we have the overlap, which I think, like you guys are saying, has, I think, a very important role in sort of disseminating, sharing knowledge, and also having a place to also feel like you're part of something bigger. The community, I think, is also for us who've been here for a while, myself first and foremost, or someone like Patrick, has always been about also the people that are coming back, like Didem speaking about people like Malike and the graduates that have gone on and set up their own practices. A large part of the people that come to us generally have access to the program in ways that are not really about how the program presents itself, but in terms of how people that go out in the world are basically practicing and operating in the world. And for us, I think it's always been a very important and positive thing, because in some way that maintained community is something that somehow continues to evolve, and that extends, I think, in a lot of places. I don't know, Cesar, if that's something that you feel is something that's important.
No, it is definitely.
And if so, how?
Actually, like, I would like to share a little bit of also why I'm here. I've always, I mean, I come from, let's say, a developable country, and I have always been questioning, like, the way that things are made. So I think every people here, have, like, maybe that common, like, they're not, like, comfortable with the status quo. Like, we want to change things, we're not saying, like, okay, we're gonna do things different just by the sake of it, but it's just, trying different things, and I think there's a value of it. I mean, and also constructing over that history of previous people of that community that has been put into the effort. So once you're actually in the program, you acknowledge, like, that work as well. So, and you're building up on this 20 years plus history.
I mean, I think it would be really useful, because you Cesar, are working directly with someone like Sajay, who was also a former student, actually a student of mine. And maybe we could play a video of some of the things that you guys have been up with, because I think a lot of the studios also are very much out in the world, sort of developing different ways of thinking about things, and that extends beyond, let's say, literally the DRL community explicitly of people that are here, but really a network of people that are really sort of operating on interesting, I think, kind of and novel research. And the things that you see at the moment on screen are very much part of Sajay and Alicia's sort of methodology about making and sort of discovering kind of novel ways of thinking about things, and seeing how kind of, very kind of industrial form of mechanical robotics could actually be used at the service of actually creating low-cost housing and so forth. And I think that that's part of the spirit of also really taking from the community that comes here, I think, a certain attitude of how we could actively participate in a lot of the problems in very different parts of the world. And so Alicia and Sajid, not to speak on their behalf, but I think are very much motivated about trying to actually find some of these solutions, particularly about what living actually means. Living in London versus living in Venezuela, living in Athens or in other countries means something very different. And the idea that we're sort of trying to explore how materiality can be sort of used, some very low-tech strategies, some very high-tech ones, is really about coupling and sort of trying to find kind of alternative solutions for, I think, historically very, human and very explicit problems. Are there some questions that are coming through? If not, then I think maybe it would be interesting.
Just a question about what type of program that is.
Yeah. So just to clarify, and the question that's coming through is basically what is the DRL? I guess what kind of program? It's a Masters of Architecture and Urbanism. We basically work at all scales. It's structured over 4 terms, so it's 16 months. And realistically speaking, the first term is really one that creates a kind of foundation about what design research is. It gives a kind of theoretical and discursive foundation for that. It's paralleled with software tutorials that help to tool up everybody who's coming to the program to have a foundation in terms of digital skills. That skill building exercise assumes that every student knows nothing. You don't need to have a pre-requirement of knowing these things. Obviously most people do to some degree, but realistically speaking we try to teach it in a way that maybe is different, with an idea of how that sort of feeds into the projects. And we do 2 primary workshops, one which is more material, which Shiri is undergoing at the moment, which also has a lot of design intuition and making strategies, but also an introduction to certain machining processes using laser cutters or 3D printing and others. And that's followed up by a computational exercise, which is a workshop of 4 weeks looking at generative algorithms and things like this. After that, you sort of embark on a 1-year research, and I think that model is something that's quite special within the AA structure, and special, I think, within the DRL structure, which is really an intensive research-led way of thinking about architecture and design as a holistic kind of body of work that is actually shared in a collaborative fashion. So basically the problems of housing to work to what the museum is today, technologies, how they influence things, these are all part of, I think, the project of what the DRL is doing now. I think maybe it's a good segue to basically show some of the work that Patrick and Pierre-Andrea have been working on, primarily under the idea of work, and very much part of Patrick's parametricism kind of thinking and semiological projects. So I'm going to just play this video now for you guys. I think what's important basically to say is that we have 3 sort of parallel strands that are running. The studios are conversational. We do meet every 2 or 3 weeks and have a joint review. All of the staff are basically participating in different levels with the different studios, some through critique, some through basically just generally sharing experience or sometimes technical skills. And so we have a large resource of staff that are very much active in terms of engaging things. A lot of the new tools that we're using in the studio are also moving into worlds of machine learning and game engines. This is Unity work that was done in Patrick and Pierre's studio. And this is all part of, I think, shaping a certain kind of strategy towards thinking about what's the most appropriate way of working on some of these problems. So the DRL, I think, has had a long-standing investment in really not having a kind of orthodox way of workflow, but actually really exploring all 3D modeling, real-time sensing, microcontrolling kind of strategies for thinking about how some of this stuff could work. And a lot of the work that you see here is really around corporate interior environments. And a lot of the work is also developed, I think, with a certain attitude towards looking at the scale of furniture and how that somehow correlates with communication strategies and how that works within a world of startup culture and incubators. A lot of the projects in Patrick and Pierre's studio are really working, sometimes with quasi-clients like Google or Apple, sometimes at the scale of a campus, sometimes at the scale of actually just like a work environment, and really trying to test, I think, at multiple scales how a kind of parametric semiology could sort of operate and contribute to those problems. So, outside of those things, I think probably it's important to also state that I guess, a moment of self-disclosure is that I also came to this program as a student. And maybe the only reason I bring that up is primarily mostly to speak, I think, about the fact that the project of the DRL is one that's quite inclusive, and it's actually one that one becomes at times passionate about and obsessive, and that culture of that, I think, is very much fed, at least in my continued motivation to be here, through the dialogue that we have with students. At least since I've been directing this program, which is the last 10 years, it's been very important for me to really see this place as something that's completely horizontal in a sense, non-hierarchical. Taking on these challenges, like to think beyond, let's say, the limitations of what any one person can have. And so maybe like for some of the Phase 2 students, you could even just speak a little bit about what you're actually working on, because I think in some sense... Yeah.
Well, I come, as Theo was saying, I come from Shaj's studio. Currently we're working on exploring, redefining new situations of living, specifically in London. So we're understanding that, let's say, like a city, it's a materialization of, let's say, social dynamics frames throughout history. And so we are playing out, let's say, this game social dynamic simulation in a game environment, which we take up on, like, it takes feedback from our fabrication process, process that we're developing, which is hot wire cutting with robotics. Further casting it in concrete. So we have been like, we came a month ago from Boston in Autodesk, so we had the opportunity to explore there in those facilities for 3 weeks, and we built like some prototypes. And we're currently taking this step further in a one-to-one scale, hopefully very soon enough. And trying to like engage in that workflow from social dynamics, how people can create like organic and self-organizing communities, more than just a prescriptive model as we have seen it like through centuries.
Okay, because I see that time is sort of wrapping up. Maybe Didem, you can speak a little bit about what you guys are working on.
Yes, I'm from Theodore's studio. Basically, we are speculating about future scenarios. And our interpretation to architecture is not to design a building like a static entity. We are more interested in dynamic entity. To create that, we are using some generative models. And maybe I should talk about the dynamics of our team. We are 4 people. One of our team members is mostly focused on machine learning, and the other one is mostly focusing on the prototyping, and Nico is working on the generative model, and I'm working on the human-machine interaction.
I think it'd probably be useful to know that your project is like millions of floating architectural bits, because I think these are the kind of things that, if that's something that is important to the students and to the staff, like the definition about what architecture is something that's really open for interrogation. And I think, Lara, I know our time is wrapping up, but I mean, if she's airborne and the team is airborne, you guys are doing like...
More about mobility. I mean, in our studio we're thinking about what is culture, and we think through mobility in the city. We're trying to make something like a new landscape, or rethink about how we're moving in the cities. So I think we don't have time, but what I would suggest is we have a presentation very soon. It is when?
On the 11th, yeah.
End of January and February. So I mean, we are also in the phase right now. We're trying to make our prototype. In 1 month we have to submit our prototype. And we don't know yet how it's going to look like, but we are working very hard on this. So,
Yeah, so maybe if we can just close with a kind of open invitation, which is our Phase 2 final juries, where we basically over 2 days showcase all of the work. Information about that stuff is on our Facebook, and we're on Instagram, and pretty much all of the social media platforms. You could follow the things, and you could follow what the kids and the students are doing. You could follow some of the stuff that the staff are doing, who are also out in the world giving lectures. You could feel free to communicate with us, and Ryan, who is sitting here very patiently with us, who is our program coordinator and who has obviously helped put all of this together. So we want to thank, at least I want to thank everybody for, yeah, basically making me not feel so lonely here by myself. And encourage people that do have questions to reach out. The DRL is really a kind of open platform, and actually we would like to invite you to participate, or at least if you have questions and want to know more, we'll try to figure out a way to sort of communicate that in the best way. So thanks very much for your time.